Under the harsh white lights of the Oversight Committee chamber, the silence was loaded not with peace, but anticipation. Reporters perched like hawks behind steel railings. Microphones hummed. C-SPAN's red tally light glowed live. The air felt too cold for July, conditioned to preserve discomfort. In the center of it all, at the long wood-grain witness table, sat Denzel Washington. He was motionless, hands folded, suit dark and crisp against the lacquered surface. But there was a quiet storm behind his eyes, a long memory. An inventory of wounds. His breathing was steady, yet his chest held centuries. Across from him, Karoline Leavitt adjusted the microphone in front of her, smiling slightly, the practiced smile of someone trained in media warfare. She was 31, blonde, poised, her brand carefully curated through virality, confrontation and confidence that fed off tension like fuel. The chairman cleared his throat. The Committee on Oversight and Accountability will come to order. A chorus of clicks followed, camera shutters snapping, pens scribbling. In today's hearing, we will examine the political weaponization of media influence, specifically regarding cultural production and potential anti-American narratives embedded in mass entertainment. Denzel's gaze didn't flicker. He'd known this was never just about film. Karoline's voice rang out first, pointed and sharp like a polished blade. Mr. Washington, you are not only one of the most prolific actors in American cinema, you are also a powerful cultural figure. Would you agree that your work influences public perception of American values? There was no need for her to say it. You're not just an actor, you're a threat. He leaned slightly forward, voice low but resonant. Influences the shadow of honesty. If truth influences perception, then perhaps the perception needs changing. A few gasps. Someone coughed. The room, until now just tense, turned volatile. Karoline arched an eyebrow. So you admit your films are meant to provoke political response? He held her gaze. They're meant to provoke truth. If that stings, the wound was already there. Behind her, aides exchanged glances. She smiled wider, as if she had expected this dance. We'll get to that, she said. But first let's talk about your film Liberty in Chains. You depicted the U.S. government framing a black activist, an FBI conspiracy. Is that responsible storytelling? Or is that fiction disguising ideology? He inhaled once, then turned. Toward the gallery, not to her. Not to Congress, but to the people. That story was based on 6 real cases. I fictionalized only the name. What you call ideology, I call biography. The weight of that line sank across the courtroom. The chairman tapped his gavel lightly. Order, please. Karoline recovered fast. Let's not pretend Hollywood isn't in the business of shaping minds. You shape them deliberately. Denzel's voice softened, which somehow made it sharper. Yes, ma'am. And you shape laws that bury them. Silence. A sudden buzz from the press section. One of the producers mouthed, "We're viral already." On social media, the quote had exploded, but Denzel wasn't here to trend. He scanned the faces across the bench, politicians dressed in certainty, some nodding, some smirking. But behind each polished face, he saw the echoes of something more ancient. Fear of disruption. Fear of memory. Karoline leaned in, ready for her next strike. And Denzel, unmoved, prepared for the one after. This wasn't a hearing. This was a reckoning. The room shifted as Karoline Leavitt leaned into her mic. Her voice sharpened with a kind of sweet venom. Mr. Washington, she began, flipping through a meticulously tabbed dossier, you've stated in past interviews that storytelling is a tool for justice. Would you say that justice, in your work, typically looks like making the government the villain? The air stiffened. Behind her, aides smirked. They had rehearsed this line. It wasn't a question, it was a trap disguised as civility. Denzel didn't flinch. He looked up slowly, not to perform, but to calculate. Karoline continued, her tone composed but mocking. Let me quote you directly. In an interview with Film and Truth, you said, I tell the stories that America would rather forget. Would you consider that patriotism or bitterness? Murmurs rippled from the gallery. Denzel held his response, absorbing the question without blinking. His silence unsettled her more than a rebuttal would have. She was expecting fire. He gave her Stillness. Caroline seized the moment. Let's talk about Freefall, your film about the urban bombing campaign that ends with a senator indicted. You claimed it was fiction. But several scenes mirrored real testimony from the church committee reports. Are you denying that you used declassified material to accuse the U.S. of domestic terrorism? He finally spoke. I'm not denying the past, he said calmly. I'm recognizing it. Karoline leaned back, arms crossed as if already victorious. So you admit your films weaponize real history to push a political agenda? Denzel didn't look at her, he looked past her at the committee dais, the audience, the cameras. I admit that the truth has consequences. If those consequences feel political, that's not my doing. That's history finally being heard. There it was. A tremor moved through the room, not from volume, but weight. A phrase so quiet, yet crafted with the precision of a courtroom. Dagger. Karoline's jaw tightened. The chairman shifted in his seat. Reporters tapped furiously on iPads. She tried to pivot. Do you think you're the arbiter of truth? I think, Denzel replied, his voice now laced with quiet defiance, the truth doesn't need an arbiter. It just needs a witness. The line landed, final, chilling. She paused, caught between pressing further or retreating to the next prepared point. She chose neither. For the first time, Karoline Leavitt was off script, and she knew it. Asterisk as the committee recalibrated from Denzel's quiet but seismic reply. The hearing briefly paused for a procedural break. Cameras cut to commercial. The audience exhaled. Denzel remained seated, eyes lowered, unmoving except for his mind, which drifted backward into memory. The screen fades to black, then reopens on a younger Denzel, barely 15, standing in the rain outside a Brooklyn precinct. His father, proud, soft-spoken, wrongfully arrested for obstructing a sidewalk protest, is being shoved into the back of a cruiser. Denzel's mother shields his eyes, but he doesn't look away. Cut to a film set decades later. A nearly identical scene is being shot for Liberty in Chains. The same cruiser, the same scream, the same injustice now reenacted, not erased. The actor portraying his father gets the take wrong. Too polished, Denzel stops the shoot, walks over, quietly says, no, he didn't struggle, he surrendered. That was the worst part. Cut again, 1989. Denzel sits in the editing room working on The Hurricane, staring at footage of Reuben Carter's solitary confinement. The real Carter had called him weeks earlier. Tell it straight, brother, he'd said. Don't make me a saint, just let them see the bars. Another cut, a school stage. 1974. A teenage Denzel performs A Raisin in the Sun at his Harlem high school. The audience is mostly black mothers. He doesn't yet know what this moment means, but he feels the shift, feels them leaning forward when he raises his voice. He realizes stories don't just entertain, they salvage something. The montage returns to the present. Denzel sits again before the committee, alone but never truly alone. The weight of those flashbulb memories sits on his shoulders, not as a burden, but as a moral map. He looks toward Karoline, who now rifles through her notes, unaware of the history that stands before her. Not just his personal history, but a cinematic echo of millions silenced. This isn't just a hearing, it's a return. A return of memory. Of names not yet cleared. Of voices still trapped in film canisters and prison records. He straightens his back, breathes deep, and prepares. The war of narratives has only just begun. Asterisk the chairman's gavel brought the room back to order. All right, he intoned, glancing between Karoline and Denzel. We'll resume with the witness's response. Denzel adjusted his microphone. The lights were hot now. He could feel the heat not from the bulbs, but from the nation's gaze. Millions were watching. Not for entertainment, but for a reckoning. Didn't raise his voice. Instead, he let it drop lower, steadier, heavier. You want to know if I have an agenda? He said, eyes locked onto Karoline's. Yes, I do. It's not political. It's ancestral. A low rumble passed through the gallery. I didn't come here to be polite. I came here to testify for the people whose stories were never told on that big screen, for the names erased from textbooks, for the voices redacted by institutions you now defend. Karoline opened her mouth, but Denzel continued, unshaken. You accuse me of injecting truth into fiction, but I've lived too much of this to draw clean lines between the two. My films don't invent injustice. They reflect it. And if that reflection offends you, maybe the mirror isn't the problem. The silence was surgical, precise, sharp. Deadly. He pulled a folded paper from his inner pocket, slowly, deliberately. This is a copy of the FBI surveillance file on James Baldwin, declassified, 70 pages. They followed a novelist because he wrote about race, not crime, not espionage, race. So tell me again, what's fiction? Gasps audible this time. Karoline's expression faltered, just slightly. Denzel turned to the rest of the committee. You call it media manipulation. I call it historical repair. And if you're more disturbed by a film than by the reality that inspired it, that says more about your comfort than my conscience. A beat? Even the chairman, a conservative moderate, looked down as if to avoid eye contact. Karoline regrouped. She leaned in, smug again. So now you're claiming to be a historian? No, Denzel said with the quiet precision of a man who has bled truth. I'm a witness. And this, he tapped the table, is the stand? He didn't raise his voice once, but he had just delivered the first blow of the day, and it landed so cleanly. The room didn't even realize they were bleeding. Karoline Leavitt regrouped behind her polished smile, but her eyes flashed with something colder calculation. Denzel's words had struck deeper than expected. He hadn't just rebutted her questions. He'd reframed the entire hearing as a moral trial. She couldn't let him control the tempo. She leaned forward, clicking her pen dramatically. Let's pivot, she said smoothly, voice laced with casual contempt. Mr. Washington, how many times have you portrayed law enforcement as racist, corrupt, or violent in your films? Denzel didn't answer immediately. She continued, training. Day, Ramong J. Israel, ESQ, The Hurricane. American Gangster all contain what some would describe as anti-police rhetoric. Would you like to clarify your position on American law enforcement for the record? The smirk she wore wasn't accidental. It was strategic, viral, already clipped for TikTok. Denzel's eyes narrowed, but his tone remained calm. I portray human systems. And those systems reflect the country that created them. If you find discomfort in that reflection, I suggest you interrogate the system, not the artist. She shot back. Or maybe you're just another elite who profits off division. Click, a photo was snapped. Denzel, stone-faced. Karoline, triumphant. The smirk spread across social media within minutes. Captured, filtered, annotated. Memes sprouted. Hollywood versus America, she owned him. Denzel exposed. But beneath the surface, something shifted. Denzel remained silent for a beat longer than expected. Too long by television standards? But not by moral ones. I profit, he said finally, by giving the voiceless a face. If that face makes you uncomfortable, that's not on me. That's on the mirror you refuse to look into. She blinked. A pause, but instead of acknowledging the weight of his words, Karoline leaned back in her chair and smirked again, colder this time. Not because she'd won, but because that moment, that camera-ready, disingenuous smirk was all she needed to flood headlines and fill fundraising emails. Behind her, a staffer texted, "Perfect. Already viral." In the back of the room, a young black journalist lowered his camera. His jaw was tight. Karoline thought she was winning a performance, but the audience outside the hearing room, the ones who knew that smirk from lived experience, recognized it for what it was. A weapon. A shield. And ultimately, a mask that would crack. Denzel adjusted the microphone, this time not to respond to Karoline's latest provocation, but to take full control of the room. The weight of her smirk still lingered in the air, but he didn't address it. He didn't need to. Instead, he turned his body slightly not toward her, but toward the panel, the public, and the record. I'd like to tell you a story. He began, his voice measured but deep with resonance. It's not about me. It's about a man named Isaiah Locke. The name didn't register with anyone in the room. But the way Denzel said it carefully, reverently made the gallery lean in. He was 17 when they arrested him. Mistaken identity, held without bail for 19 months. No conviction, no apology, just gone. 2 birthdays behind bars. The judge later admitted there was a procedural error. These things happen, that's what they told his mother. He? Let the pause hang. I played a version of Isaiah in a film that never got wide distribution. Too raw, too real. We screened it once at a small college in Newark. That night, a public defender in the audience recognized the case, reopened the file, and Isaiah finally got a letter clearing his name. Another pause. This one heavier. 3 weeks later he was shot. Drive-by, wrong place, wrong time. The same way he went in? You could hear a pin drop. I never met him, Denzel said softly. Only his mother. She told me he felt like someone finally saw him. That's what storytelling does. It resurrects. It refuses to let names vanish. Karoline shifted in her seat, but didn't interrupt. Her script didn't prepare her for this. This isn't about politics, Denzel continued. It's about visibility. About who gets to be remembered and who's erased before they even arrive. A young woman in the gallery began to cry quietly. A veteran congressman looked away, hiding his eyes. Even one of Karoline's aides dropped his pen. Denzel ended simply. I'd bring their voices into the room. Because if I don't, who will? No fireworks. No raised voice. Just the quiet, gut-punching sound of someone pulling ghosts into the light. And for the first time since the hearing began, the spotlight turned not toward confrontation, but toward consequence. Asterisk. By the time Denzel leaned back in his chair, the hearing room had become unnervingly quiet. But outside its walls, the storm had already begun. Twitter, now X, exploded within minutes. Clips of Denzel's calm dismantling of Karoline's provocations were everywhere. The quote, "If I don't bring their voices into the room, who will?" trended #1 in under 30 minutes. Activist accounts posted side-by-side reels of Isaiah Locke's real arrest record next to stills from Denzel's independent film. College students stitched their reactions, crying openly. Veterans of past civil rights movements reposted clips, calling it the return of witness storytelling. Even rival celebrities weighed in, some praising, others warning that Hollywood shouldn't enter Congress. On the other side, conservative influencers clipped Karoline's smirk, adding flame emojis and tags like #LeavittSavage. She was branded the new killer by a far-right streamer. One post read, "Denzel's just another millionaire playing victim." Karoline stood her ground. It racked up 1 million views in an hour. Cable news split predictably. Fox News ran the chyron. Denzel Washington melts down on the Hill. MSNBC countered, a masterclass in grace under fire. But most Americans didn't need commentary. They saw it raw direct from livestream and formed their own conclusions. In a modest apartment in Baltimore, an elderly black woman sat alone, eyes glued to her cracked phone screen. She whispered to no one. He said it. He finally said it. In a college dorm in Kentucky, a first-gen Latina law student watched the clip of Denzel naming Isaiah Locke. She had never heard of him before. By midnight, she had printed his case file. She would cite it in her final thesis. Meanwhile, Karoline's team prepped the spin. She tweeted, "Proud to stand for truth and question those who shape our culture. No one is above accountability, not even Hollywood royalty." It backfired. Replies flooded in with a single repeated phrase, "But you had no answer for Isaiah." The hearing wasn't just a political moment anymore. It had become a digital battleground of memory, meaning, and moral clarity. And Denzel wasn't trending as an actor. He was trending as a witness. When the hearing resumed after a recess, the atmosphere had changed. The political theater of the morning was gone, burned off by the heat of what Denzel had unleashed. What had started as a partisan spectacle now felt more like a reckoning. Karoline glanced at her phone beneath the table. The viral backlash had begun to seep through her carefully constructed facade. But she stayed the course, visibly composed, publicly unfazed. Chairman Dawson gave Denzel the floor again, this time with a curiously respectful nod. Denzel reached into his leather case and pulled out a slim black folder. "I'd like to submit a brief supplement to the record," he said. The aides hesitated, then distributed the paper's faded reproductions of redacted intelligence documents, archived FBI memos, and old Senate testimony transcripts from the Church Committee. "Over the last 6 decades," Denzel said, "our government has documented its own efforts to silence, distort, or erase black storytellers and community leaders under the guise of national security." He didn't raise his voice. He let the document speak for him. COINTELPRO didn't end with Dr. King. It moved, it adapted. It entered studios, publishers, distribution deals. "I'm not speculating, I'm quoting your archives." Karoline snapped. "And are you alleging that you've been targeted?" "No," Denzel replied. "I'm showing that erasure has precedent, that censorship has fingerprints, and that when someone like me tells a story rooted in trauma, we're labeled political. But when someone like you rewrites that story, it's called patriotism." The silence was immediate. He flipped the page. "This," he continued, tapping a highlighted line, "is a memo from 1987 identifying African-American-led productions with subversive undertones. That's the same year I shot Cry Freedom." "Same studio, same subject?" Karoline interjected, but her voice cracked. "This isn't relevant to your acting career," he cut in, calm but firm. "This isn't about acting. This is about agency." Gasps again, Chairman Dawson asked the staff to officially enter the materials into the record. The gavel struck not to silence, but to validate. Denzel leaned forward. "You asked earlier why I feel compelled to speak. This is why. Because even our stories are surveilled. And the ones you erase come back louder," Aide whispers. Dozens of reporters now typing furiously. One tweet would later read, "Denzel just turned the congressional hearing into a crime scene and handed them the fingerprints. The trap Karoline had laid was now surrounded by evidence." And the record would remember it. The hearing reached an unusual calm of fragile silence, like the eye of a storm. Even the cameras seemed to lean in closer. No shouting. No interruptions. Just two opposing forces sitting across from each other, poised to confront not just facts but the meaning behind them. Karoline folded her hands, abandoning the smirk. For something colder, poise, precision, she cleared her throat. "Mr. Washington," she said carefully, "would you agree that art should unify, not divide?" Denzel tilted his head slightly. "It depends on what it's unifying us around." She seized the opening. "Shouldn't we be striving toward shared values? Patriotism? Responsibility? There's a difference between remembering our past and weaponizing it." Denzel didn't flinch. "There's also a difference between healing and pretending the wound never existed." The air grew dense. Karoline pressed on. "You accuse this nation of systemic injustice? But how is that different from sowing resentment? From creating new enemies out of old history?" Denzel leaned in, his tone almost gentle. "You confuse discomfort with division. You think talking about injustice creates it? But silence didn't. Solve slavery. Silence didn't stop segregation. Silence didn't free Isaiah Locke. A hush, that name again. Karoline's voice sharpened. "And what of responsibility? Isn't it dangerous to raise a generation on stories of victimhood?" Denzel locked eyes with her. The room stilled. "I don't tell stories of victims. I tell stories of survival, of resistance, of truth. You want responsibility? Start by taking ownership of what this country has done and what it still denies." For a moment, Karoline said nothing. Her script was ready for rebuttals, not for moral inversions. Denzel didn't let her recover. "You think I divide? But what I do, what artists do, is drag buried truths to the surface. That's not division. That's clarity." Outside the hearing, millions watched. This wasn't about left or right anymore. It had morphed into a deeper debate about the soul of American identity and who gets to define it. Two worldviews sat across from each other, one built on protection of image, the other on preservation of truth. And for the first time, the audience wasn't watching a hearing. They were witnessing a philosophical crossfire. And truth, it seemed, was beginning to win. The next morning. Denzel arrived at the hearing chamber alone earlier than usual. No legal team, no entourage. Just a worn leather folder in his hand and a quiet calm across his face. The air buzzed with anticipation. The night before, clips from his philosophical exchange with Karoline had gone viral. Millions had shared the line. Silence didn't free Isaiah Locke. And now, the nation wanted to know, who was Isaiah Locke? Chairman Baxter adjusted his mic. Mr. Washington, you said yesterday under oath that this is about more than film, that this is about truth. You implied that a real man Isaiah Locke was disappeared by state violence. Do you have proof? Denzel stood, his voice steady. Not just proof. I have the government's own footage. Gasps. Karoline. Leavitt's face froze. He placed a flash drive onto the table before the committee and gestured to the tech team. Play the video. No edits. No commentary. The screen behind him flickered to life. A grainy body cam recording filled the monitors. A black man mid-30s, tall, slender, frightened, was shown exiting his car with hands raised. The timestamp was from 7 years ago. The audio crackled, officers shouting conflicting commands, then a panicked shot. A second later, Isaiah Locke lay motionless on the pavement, unarmed, innocent, dead. The footage continued. The officers began coordinating a false narrative. One said, say he reached for something. Another, he matched the description. That's all we need. Then came the silence. The video cut off. All eyes returned to Denzel. That footage was buried, he said. Classified. I received it through a whistleblower, someone who couldn't carry the weight of silence anymore. The studio helped me corroborate it before we incorporated parts of it into the final cut of the 9th hour. We weren't dramatizing injustice. We were documenting it. Karoline tried to interject. This doesn't prove you had the right to. He turned to her, voice sharp now. You're more outraged at how I showed it than that it happened. The audience in the chamber broke into murmurs. Journalists furiously typed. The committee members exchanged looks, some uncomfortable. Others visibly moved. Baxter leaned back, eyes narrowed. Is this still a debate about ethics in film, Congresswoman? Or is this about something we've all tried too hard not to see? For the first time, Karoline had no retort. The courtroom wasn't just on fire, it was lit with a truth too painful to ignore. And the tide had begun to turn, the cameras. Cut, the crowd dispersed. But the war behind the walls had just begun. Karoline Leavitt stormed down the marble hallway, heels clacking like gunfire. Aide after aide struggled to keep pace, clutching phones and folders and damage control. Why wasn't that footage flagged? She barked, slamming her office door open. We assumed it was dramatized, stammered one assistant. The whistleblower, we didn't know he'd go public. Karoline ripped the mic pin from her blazer. Denzel Washington just broadcast a state-sanctioned killing to millions of Americans. And we look like the censors. Another aide stepped forward meekly. The studio confirmed the footage. It matches the original internal case. Number from 7 years ago. It was buried in sealed files, military police joint jurisdiction. Karoline's jaw clenched. So now I'm defending a system that buries murders? Great. Perfect. She turned to the mirror, staring at herself, searching for the right posture, the right expression. But all she saw was a narrative slipping from her control. Outside, public sentiment was shifting. Networks were rerunning the footage on a loop. Protesters had gathered on the Capitol steps by noon. Some held up signs that read, Isaiah Locke, say his name. This is not just a movie. Art didn't lie, the government did, her phone buzzed. A message from her donor liaison. Pull back, let it cool. He's got the moral high ground. She threw the phone onto the couch. In the corner of the room, a television flickered. Silently, Denzel was now speaking to a reporter outside the hearing chamber. We didn't come to make a film. We came to finish someone's unfinished truth. Karoline stared at the screen. Something strange flickering behind her eyes. Not rage this time, doubt. A chasm was opening inside her between the political game she had mastered and a truth too large to spin. She'd stepped into this hearing to destroy a man's credibility. Now she was watching her own unravel. And for the first time, Karoline Leavitt, queen of the soundbite, had nothing to say. Only silence.